Good morning or afternoon to everyone that's joined us so far. This is our second clinic for the energy modeling community. So, for anyone that maybe doesn't know what a clinic is and you've not joined the first one we had, these are more focused sessions similar to our webinars, but not focusing specifically on energy modeling tools or any of the case studies that we've been showcasing a lot. This is more about the accompanying skills you can learn and you'll need to have when you want to do energy modeling. So in the case of our first clinic, which was hosted by Salisu, he talked about our academic paper writing. And now today we're lucky enough to have Vivien Foster from our international partnerships lead at CCG, and also she's at Imperial College. So Vivien will be discussing policy briefs today, sort of giving you all the tips and tricks, what you might need to write a successful policy brief, having done so many times herself. So just for some like housekeeping, we will be recording this session. Please at any time use the chat to talk to each other or to ask me questions that I can pass on to Vivien or even straight to Vivien. You can raise your hand, and we can try and work through those. My recommendation would try to be wait for the question time. And then also you can use the Q&A function if you want to, keep yourself anonymized. So, yeah, try and enjoy this session. It's going to be quite insightful. So, yeah, I'll pass over to Vivien. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Kane. It's a great pleasure to join you here in the energy modeling community. I've spent most of my career at the interface between research and policy. So I've often found myself needing to make that translation from academic articles to policy briefs. And I'd like to share with you some of my experience today and hopefully hear some of yours as well. In order to get us started, we're going to do a quick Slido poll. So grateful if you could join the Slido poll either by going to the website slido.com and entering the joining code that appears on the slide, or by using the QR code directly with the camera on your phone. So I'll just give you a minute or two to be doing that. Good. So we'll go maybe to the first question in the poll. I just wanted to have a better sense of who you are because it will help us to guide the discussion. So I'd like to know whether you're academics, which is what I would sort of expect for a topic like this. But I was also curious as to whether we had people from the government sector or elsewhere. And indeed, as expected, it's predominantly an academic crowd. But nice that we do have also some policymakers with us as well, since that's the target audience that we'll be focusing on. So my next question for you is, how much prior experience do you have writing policy briefs? Are you a veteran already? You've done this before. Are you grappling with it right now? Or is it something you hope to do in the future, but maybe haven't started yet? Okay. Well, it's exciting to see that we have a lot of people who are actually grappling with this right now for the first time. And I suspect that's what motivated you to come along. And this is probably, perfect for you. We've also got quite a lot of experienced people in the room, so they will know what the challenges have been. They've lived through the challenges, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from them a bit more about what that experience has been like. So that's very helpful. So my next question is a word cloud. In one word, which I know is challenging, but that's how the word cloud works. In one word, what do you think is most challenging about writing policy briefs? What would you say has been the hardest thing about the process? Vocabulary, interesting. Being relevant to ground realities. Okay, very good. So that's like a relevance thing. Communication, somehow linked a bit to vocabulary. How to, great. Contents, okay. Summarizing. So clearly people have been facing this thing about making it shorter, right? It's not called a brief for nothing. It's supposed to be brief. Getting attention, that's a good one. Attention. Synergy. That's intriguing. It's clear about what that means. Clarity, yes. Again, in the communication area. Prioritization, action centric. That we'll definitely be talking about that. How to make it action orientated. Okay, excellent. I do love these word clouds because it's really gives me an insight into what you're dealing with, and it resonates so much with my own experience. So I think we'll have a lot to meet on in this session. Great. So thanks very much for setting the scene in that way. Relevance. Relevance has just got a boost. It now seems to be number one. Okay, excellent. So just to give you an overview, I thought it would be helpful to sort of distill my experience with policy briefs into I was thinking of the 10 commandments or the 10 do's and don'ts. I only got as far as 8. So maybe we'll consider at the end whether I missed anything out or whether we'd want to add to these 8, but it seems like a good number. So we're going to be going through each of these points, zooming all the way out, making the policy connection, that's your relevance issue, keeping it as brief as possible, using simple language, creating powerful visuals, going light on methodology, translating conclusions into recommendations, that was your action-centric point, and producing a communications package. So let's go now through each of these. We're going to sort of set the scene, what's the issue, and then we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts in each case to make it very practical. So the first thing that I've noticed is the need to zoom all the way out. The need to situate your detailed research topic within a much wider knowledge landscape. And to use the analogy of a forest, I think that when you're an academic researcher, you have to zoom in. You're like someone who's got that big telephoto lens on your camera, because in order to make a topic researchable, it has to be small, it has to be detailed, it has to be specific, it has to be deep. So you're like the person who's right up against the trunk of the tree and you're looking at the texture of the bark there on the left and you're going into each little crevice. That's the researcher worldview. But the policymaker on the right inhabits a really different world. The policymaker is a big picture person. They don't have time for this level of detail and specificity. They want the big picture. They want the worldview. They want to see the entire forest. And if you just give them a piece of bark, it's not going to light up their eyes. So how do we handle this need to zoom all the way out, which I find that people find very difficult often? So one way to do this is not to dive right in. So an example of diving right in would be something like, new research shows that efficient wood stoves are associated with significant reductions in the occurrence of pulmonary diseases in under fives. Okay, so very scientific, but how do I relate to that? So what you need to do on the right-hand side is to take time to set the context for your work. And that context probably to you feels so obvious that it's not worth mentioning and you kind of forget that it's there. But if you don't mention it, you'll lose everybody else apart from a few colleagues who share your passion. So what would the scene setting be for this false start that we have on the left? So the first green paragraph, what's the issue? The issue here is indoor air pollution. So we want to say it causes millions of cases of illness and premature death globally each year. So that's great for global scene setting, but your policymaker is in country X and isn't too worried about the rest of the world. So then you need to bring that down to the national level. In country X, indoor air pollution accounts for X% of the burden of disease. And then to make it even more hard-hitting, these deaths are disproportionately concentrated among women and children. And here's the issue. To date, little was known about how adoption of efficient cook stoves affects child health. Okay, now that I'm armed with all of that context, I'm ready to dive into the paragraph. New research shows that efficient wood stoves are associated with significant reductions in the occurrence of pulmonary diseases in under fives. So now I know why I need to know that. I know why I should be excited about that. But if you just went straight in, it would have left me cold. So that's the first thing to do is and as we go through this, it's really helpful if you have your current policy brief that you're writing or the next one you're going to write in your head and start to think about what would that context look like for your particular case? What is the, zooming out and giving context that you need to do for your specific topic? So do keep a note of that as we go through. So the second recommendation is to make the policy connection. So here we have these two different worlds, the research world and the policy world, and they need to meet somewhere in the middle. If they don't meet, the policy brief is going to flop, essentially. So in order to meet the other side, we need to understand. So researchers tend to care about very specific research things. So we get excited about data, we get excited about evidence and empirical proof of things. We want to be original, we want to be path-breaking, and we want to be rigorous. Otherwise, the academic establishment will not judge us favorably. So these are the things that preoccupy us as researchers and that we tend to really focus on. However, policymakers, they live in a different world and they're not too bothered about these things. They have a different set of priorities. So they care about saving money, making money go further, value for money, cost effectiveness, budget constraints. They care about economic impact. Is this going to create jobs or produce growth? They care about distributional impact. Who's going to suffer? Are politically relevant groups going to be impacted by this intervention? And often they care about live policy debates. So often maybe an issue that, if you talked about it 10 years ago, no one would care. So say critical minerals, for example, is a topic that's become very live in the policy debate in the last few years. If you were writing about it 10 or 15 years ago, maybe people wouldn't have been very interested. But nowadays, anything on critical minerals is policy relevant. And so your job as a researcher writing a policy brief is to try and understand if you can make a score on any of the bullet points on the right-hand side. If something that you're researching is helpful on any of those 4 points, then you can build that bridge towards policymakers. Now, of course, one can always do this at the end of the research process. Even smarter is to think about it at the beginning, before you even start writing the academic article, to try and position your research question in a way that will ultimately feed back into one of these live policy issues. So these are the ways in which we can build the bridge. So let's stay with cook stoves as our practical example. So we can't assume that it matters. It matters to everybody, that everyone's going to be interested in it. We can't just assert it is important to understand the health impacts of clean cook stoves. Because to me, as a policymaker, I may not understand yet why that is. So what I can do there on the right-hand side is to connect it to a policy debate. And here I'm going to connect it to the money. Remember, we have these 4 buzzwords. Money was a key one. So I'm going to try and connect the health impact of cook stoves back to money. So how could we do that? We could say, country X allocates millions of dollars of concessional finance each year to support clean cooking interventions. Yet the health impacts of these interventions are not scientifically proven. By targeting concessional resources to cook stoves with proven health impacts, country X can avoid wasting limited development finance and reduce health burdens on the economy. Okay. So it's an example. Maybe we could have said even more about the health burdens on the economy, because that would have linked it back to economic growth. But we've already here tried to make a connection between this very esoteric scientific topic and the sort of buzzwords that policymakers care about. So moving on to our third point, keep it brief. So this is a sort of how long is a piece of string? So there's an optimal length for reader engagement. So some people would say, if you talk to a journalist, they would tell you the shorter the better. Every 100 words that you add to the length, you'll start to lose people. And maybe that's true in like a very journalistic environment. In a more kind of policy brief or feature article type of environment, there seems to be some consensus around a word length of around 1,500 words, 2,000 words, that it can be helpful to go up to that level. You get more engagement, but you don't get any more engagement beyond it. And this is obviously very challenging, although it's true also that even in the world of academic journals, target word lengths are important. And so typically already have some discipline in brevity. But in the case of policy briefs, we have to exercise even more discipline. We need to avoid producing a lengthy text with too much detail and few visual cues. What we do need to do is to shorten and enhance readability. So it's not just about few words, but it's about the right kinds of words. And I think you pointed to this in the word cloud when you talked about vocabulary, clarity. So a good start is to set a target word length, potentially in the 1,000 to 2,000 range, which is about 2 to 4 pages. And usually it's helpful to allocate your word budget. When your word budget is so low, you need to sort of break it down. Well, I'm going to use, 100 of those words for the introduction, and then I'm going to use 500 to explain the results, and then 500 to talk about the policy implications or whatever it is. But do take that word budget, break it down into blocks, and give yourself sort of sub-targets for different sections. You then need to prune the material down to its most essential elements and avoid wordiness. So you're kind of like, it's like pruning a tree. You want all the sort of spurious details to come off and the actual sort of structure of the branches to become through clearer. Now, in many ways, it can be very helpful to use an editor because the editor is experienced in this kind of thing and also is not so emotionally attached to the content of the writing and therefore can be maybe more objective about what to cut. Now, of course, editors have traditionally been expensive and difficult to come by, but I have to admit that AI is very good at editing. And I'm not, a great fan of AI in general, but I found that particularly for shortening something, if you've set yourself a 2,000 word limit and you're still at 2,500, AI can be quite helpful at just lopping off those words. AI can also help with stylistic things like changing it from a more technical to a less technical style. So obviously use with caution and always review very carefully the product and make further changes. Don't use it in a sort of mindless way. But judicious use of it could be helpful and brings editorial services, into the reach of many people who might not have had the budget to hire an editor and so on. So in addition to just shortening it, there are other aspects of the way that it's presented and written that are important. And one of these is having a good title. The chances are that whatever title you had for your academic article will not be suitable for a policy brief. It needs to be catchy, it needs to be punchy, it needs to, touch upon some of those high profile types of topics that policymakers are interested in. And it needs to be relatively short. Once again, AI is very good at creating titles, so it would be something to try. It's often good practice in a policy brief to have right at the beginning a summary and key findings. The summary might be 50 words or something like that. And although it's similar to an academic abstract, obviously the style of it would be different. It would be much more accessible and much more focused on the policy issues. And then sometimes you have these key findings. So you have like 3 bullet points under the summary that just highlight the 3 key findings that you want to share. Essentially, the audiences out there are quite lazy readers. And so anything you can do to make it easy for them to support this quick skim reading of material, to allow people to dive in and just pick up points easily, is going to increase the engagement and readership that you get. And so that applies to things like bullet points, using bullet points, maybe having some like bolded first sentences or bolded keywords at the beginning of bullet points to help people to scan through it. Pull quotes can be very helpful, because this is where you take a key like statement from the brief and put it in italics in a little kind of box in the margin so that people can read that as a quote. Tabulations, visual elements, and boxes are all ways of engaging the reader. So if I'm seeing like 4 pages of just solid text, I'm going to be much less engaged than if that's punctuated with some tables, visual elements, maybe a little box with an example, maybe a pull quote or 2 here and there. Final point I wanted to make was about the column layout. So it's also proven that people read more easily when text is in like narrow, like two narrow columns on a page rather than like full length of the page. And which is why newspapers have traditionally done this. So all of these tricks, if you like, can help to keep readers engaged and to, even if they're lazy readers, quote unquote, who are skim readers, and many people are very time constrained these days. These things will help them to get the essence of what you're saying, even if they don't read all the way through. Great. So the fourth point, use simple language, and that speaks to points around clarity that were mentioned in our word cloud at the beginning. So, and vocabulary was a word that came up. So there is, of course, a work speak and there's a home speak. And we're all at this point in our careers, we get quite proficient at speaking in work speak and using all the jargon with our colleagues that everybody understands at work, but which is quite obscuring for people who are not in that world. So one sort of quite difficult test, I have to admit, is to try and talk about your paper at the dinner table at home with your family, spouse, children, parents, relatives, because there you've got a sort of captive audience, but it's an audience that doesn't normally share your technical jargon world. And it can be a good place to experiment with saying things simply and seeing whether you're boring them to tears within 5 minutes, whether their eyes are glazing over because they have no idea what you're talking about. It's like a really good sounding board, if you like, to try things out. So you're trying to, as you write the brief, you're trying to shift from the work speak a little bit more to the home speak, the kind of general, clear ways of expressing things. And so to give some examples of this, the need to avoid technical jargon, to avoid long sentences and very convoluted messages. We need to try and write in plain English, find non-technical synonyms for technical words, or sometimes use metaphors. Metaphors can be very helpful ways of explaining something complicated. And always try, if you've got very long sentences, shorter ones are always going to be easier for people to digest. So here we have an example from power system planning. So on the left-hand side, we have, what you shouldn't be doing. So let's read it through. Contemporary energy systems integrate multi-scale generation architectures encompassing variable renewable sources, centralized thermal plants, and distributed storage units interfaced through power electronics. Optimal dispatch leverages stochastic load forecasting and nonlinear control algorithms to minimize system losses and carbon emissions while ensuring grid stability. Coupled with advanced demand-side management and real-time market signals, these cyber-physical networks exploit high-resolution telemetry and predictive analytics to dynamically balance supply and a decarbonized and digitalized operational landscape. So this would be a fabulous, very technical thing to write in an academic article. But in practice, you can boil it down to the sentence on the right. Modern energy systems combine different sources of energy to meet consumer demand for electricity as efficiently as possible in real time. Yep, so that's all you need to say. And once you see it, you think, goodness, yeah, it's not difficult, but it can be difficult to step back from the world on the left. Great, so that's the simple language. So let's move across now to creating powerful visuals. And I'm sure everyone's heard of the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's so true, but it has to be the right kind of picture. So this is a true story. I worked some years ago on the development of the multi-tier framework, which is a way of measuring energy access in a more nuanced way. I think many may be familiar with it. And when this was developed as a technical, framework, this table was the way it was defined because there are 5 tiers of access. and they defined relative to 7 different dimensions of electricity supply characteristics, including peak capacity, including hours per day of energy availability, reliability of voltage, quality of service, affordability, legality, and health and safety. So you kind of have this big 7 by 5 matrix with all these different kind of little, thresholds that are very parsimoniously defined in this table. So obviously, when the time came to communicate with policymakers about the multi-tier framework, we weren't going anywhere with this table. And so we interacted with a graphic artist. And again, this is not necessarily always affordable, but to the extent that again, it's getting easier to produce graphics with AI type of tools. But to the extent that you can interact with someone who's visually gifted, it really helps, because we got from this to this. So this is the same thing, essentially. It explains what the different tiers of electricity access mean, but it does it largely through pictures. So you can see that tier 0, I've got a candle. Tier 1, I've got a light bulb. Tier 2, I can start to support some, maybe a small TV or a fan. Tier 3, I've got like motor power. Tier 4, I'm supporting refrigeration. Tier 5, I basically can do anything I want. And at the bottom, you've got those lovely little circles, which are showing the continuity of service in hours. And they distinguish between daytime, the little sunshine, and nighttime is the little moon. And so suddenly, just to go back and forth, you've gone from something that really is very dry to something that really just leaps off the page at you and, really clarifies what it is. So I can't overemphasize the value of visuals and the need to invest in them, and the amount of work. It probably took us hours and hours of work, and probably multiple iterations between the table and the picture before it worked. But once you've got the picture, it's like a huge advantage. So it's worth investing that time, although it can be challenging to do so. Sometimes we don't think it's worth it. But that's often what it takes to get the message across. So avoid being text heavy. Avoid simply transplanting the technical visuals from your academic article. So when I'm saying bring visuals into the brief, I don't mean the same visuals necessarily that you have in the academic article, because chances are they'll be way too complicated. So you need to take the time to simplify the originals. Maybe you've got a chart that shows lots of different things, but the important thing is just to show the contrast between type A and type B. And you could just basically strip that out into 2 little bars next to each other. Or maybe, you can boil it into a pie chart. If you're going to use charts, use the simple ones that everyone understands. Use large fonts. You have no idea how many times you see PowerPoint presentations or briefs, and the font is just absolutely tiny. And make sure everything's clearly labeled. And of course, ideally, consider designing an infographic. So an infographic, it goes even a bit beyond what we just showed, and is more like can sometimes be like a cartoon or like a flow chart with lots of little pictures that kind of walks you through the entire argument. And those can be very valuable as well. So message number 6 is to go light on methodology. So for an academic, methodology is everything, right? It's central. You have to demonstrate that your methodology was cutting edge, it was rigorous, you applied all these really fancy techniques, right? But for the policymaker, really, isn't fussed too much about methodology. It's pretty peripheral. And so this is an example from a piece of research about critical mineral processing in Africa. And one of the challenges in this research is that the data is awful on mining in Africa, unfortunately. And so we had to use 4 different types of data. We used data from the Geological Survey, data from the Standard & Poor's database. We use cross-country trade information, and we use satellite imagery. And we had to combine these four different types of information in order to come up with geo-localized information on mining mineral production. So in order to do that, we came up with this amazing flow chart that you see there on the left, which explains exactly how we integrated all of this to come up with a kind of consistent integration. So we were very proud of the flow chart. But of course, not going into the policy brief version, because all that we need to say in the policy brief is on the right. This research is based on the integration of all available technical and economic data on mining and mineral processing activities in Africa, period. One sentence, simple, easy to understand. Because essentially what the policymaker wants is reassurance. They want the reassurance that somebody who knows what they're doing has done something serious. And so, but they don't want to be dragged through the details. There's such a thing as too much information when it comes to methodology. So a brief and intuitive explanation, accessible to a non-technical audience, and it just reassures me, yeah, that this people haven't just pulled this out of the air. They've done something serious. It's also another way to handle this as well is to just reference the underlying academic article as a signpost. So there might be, maybe 10% or fewer of your readers might actually want to know what you did. But that's fine. You give them the reference. You can say, for further information, go to this reference, and then they've got the benefit of all your academic writing. So don't explain the methodology, avoid long methodological explanations, which is eating up, remember, your very limited word count that we have at the beginning. Avoid incorporating complicated and impenetrable graphics like the one I just showed you. No need for technical annexes, no need for footnotes. Just keep it in the text as much as possible. Great, so now we move on to message 7, which I think is in some ways one of the most important and difficult things. And it's one that you flagged in your word cloud when you talked about relevance and you talked about action-centric, I think was one of the words that came up. So essentially, as academics, we are in the world of thinking, but policymakers are in the world of acting. And we need to make that transition from from an academic perspective, we might call research findings or research conclusions, which are quite sort of knowledge related, to, well, how should that change the way I act, which is what the policymaker cares about. Policymaker doesn't care about knowledge for its own sake in the way that maybe the academic might, but only knowledge that might somehow influence what I do or indicate that I need to do it differently. Avoid considering the knowledge findings as the end point of your work. That's not the end point. So in the brief, we're going to be very, very short on, we're going to put in the context. That's important. We have a very, very brief nod to the methodology. Then we can talk about findings, but then we need to leave a good chunk of our word budget for this translation of conclusions into recommendations. And in order to do that, we need to reflect on the implications of the findings from an action perspective. And this will help. What will help us is if at the beginning we did that exercise of bridging from the research to the policy landscape. And we know that there are those things. It's about money, it's about growth, it's about jobs, it's about addressing live policy debates. So we need to try and make the connection back from the thing that we found to the action area. So here's 2 small examples. So we start on the left. Africa's mineral processing ambitions can be expected to double the associated carbon emissions. So that's factual. That's the finding. That's what the simulations told us. But it leaves the policymaker a bit cold. So what's the recommendation, the policy recommendation that goes with that finding? Well, it's on the right-hand side, and it goes, develop clean sources of energy for mineral processing to contain anticipated rapid growth of carbon emissions. So this is now telling me a remedy, telling me something I need to do, telling me that if I'm not careful, I'm going to not meet my carbon emission targets. So I better anticipate by ensuring that enough clean energy capacity is developed. Or if we go back to our cook stove example, we have a second example. So the academic finding might be of 5 cook stove designs studied, only type A results in measurable health benefits for women and children. Very cool finding academically, but again, it leaves the policymaker a bit cold. What am I supposed to do with that? So on the right-hand side, we have the policy recommendation. Amend national regulatory frameworks to require that publicly funded cook stove programs adopt type A stoves only. Okay, so there's the action. There's the thing that needs to change in order for this new piece of knowledge to start to have a real world impact. So it's a good exercise to do this with your policy brief, to write down your findings on the left and then try and map each finding to a policy action that may flow from it. Okay, so our final recommendation or idea number 8 is about producing a communications package. Communications package is a related suite of products targeting different media and market segments. So it might be quite helpful to think about your work stream, your research area, as an inverted pyramid. At the sort of base or the top or the broad end of the pyramid is the academic article. Here we have the full blow-by-blow, detailed, rigorous, methodologically grounded description of what you did and the findings, and it's all it's done to a very high level of academic rigor. So, but that will only go to, in a sense, that biggest or largest piece will go to the smallest audience, which is your very specialized colleagues who work in your area of research. So that's like the smaller audience. To get to the next largest audience, I need to go from the academic article to the policy brief. And that's the journey that we've been describing so far. It will be a smaller document, but a bigger audience than my original audience, but still maybe only confined to quite serious policymakers who want to be informed about their decisions and who take time to read policy briefs. So that's already perhaps a bigger audience or a more impactful audience than the original one, but is still relatively narrow. So then maybe another product that I could then derive, particularly if I've worked a lot on my visuals, as we discussed, is a PowerPoint presentation. PowerPoint presentation has the advantage that people don't need to read it. It can be used at big events to convey things easily to large audiences. Sometimes PowerPoint presentations can be posted and people will navigate through them and extract the meaning more easily than a brief. So that's potentially a larger audience. Then if I want to go even larger, I'm talking more like a press article or a blog. Here I'm targeting really Joe public in general in my country. And there I have to go even simpler, briefer, catchier than the policy brief, right? That's an even tougher hurdle, if you like. But the same principles apply that we've just been discussing, but we have to apply them even more radically, shorter word counts, simpler, even simpler language and so on. And then, the extreme is the social media post, which might just be 20 words or whatever, a soundbite or two. And that potentially, can go even wider. So when we're embarked on an important line of research, it's helpful maybe to create a plan to work through these different products. You're not going to be able to do it with everything that you do, but when there's a really landmark piece of research, something that's really important that you've worked on, that you really think it's worth investing the effort in raising the profile, this would be a good strategy. And there it would be important to engage with the communications office at the university and get, again, some professional advice about how to do that. So it's really about thinking about the different audiences your research should reach to create impact, and producing a nested collection of communication products that progressively boil down your main findings into an increasingly condensed and increasingly populist form, if we can call it that. Good. So we've now gone through the 8 different recommendations. And I'd like to now, as we sort of finalize this, I'd like to move you into another Slido poll. And I'd like you to rank the 8 ideas from the hardest. So number one, the first ones that you click in your poll should be the ones you think are hardest, all the way down to the easiest, just to see, what people's reactions are to the material. So this is a bit of a challenging poll because you've got to rank 8 things. So you may need to reflect a little bit, but hopefully you're still live on the poll and you can start to introduce your thoughts. Okay, so I think one person is starting to rank. I see. 2. Okay, good. It's a bit of a difficult task. I'll give you a few minutes to do that.
Reshared the details in the chat as well, everyone, if the QR isn't quite working.
Thanks, Kane. Yeah. Yeah, I should have warned people that this was going to come back a bit later. Okay. So there's definitely people ranking. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem to come up in real time the way that the other one did, but maybe I need to at some point hit return. We'll give people a little bit longer. Oh, now it's going. Okay, so these are now what we're seeing with the small numbers at the top are the hard things. So we have a tie between making policy connections and translating conclusions into recommendations. And that makes sense because those two things are very related. If I make the policy connections, it will then be easier for me to translate the conclusions into recommendations. So I think, I really agree with you that that's one of the most challenging things. And then I think the visuals, it makes sense because often a lot of us who are researchers, we may not have those kind of skills, that's not what we were selected for, perhaps. And so creating the visuals may often require interacting with other people who have maybe more of an artistic bent or, better graphic design type of background. So that's important. I think we can't do it all by ourselves here. We do usually need people to support. So I think we are, the policy connections still is right at the top. The simple language has come up a bit more. I do think that simple language has become incredibly easier because of AI than it used to be. So I do think that there we've got a sort of hack that we can adopt on the simple language. Although it's obviously it's a cultural shift for us once we've trained ourselves to speak in this technical manner, and suddenly we have to unlearn it. Interesting. Very good. So, Kane, I think this has been really informative. There's still a little bit of action going, so we can leave the poll up a little bit longer, I think. But I don't know if there are any questions, or as much as questions, I'd be really interested for you to share your experience if you've done this before. Are there things here that you would disagree with, or you think there are other recommendations that you might want to add to the list? As well, very interested to hear those kind of comments in addition to any questions that you might have.
Sure. Maybe I could I think there's a hand up and then some questions, but maybe I could just go first. And say my experience, last year with leading on a policy brief for the data to deal. I think that what I learned was, having been my first time, was certainly the structure of the wording and the language you use in particular was very different to when I had written an academic paper, or even very different to university and previous ways of presenting information. I think that's something I learned was being more concise and trying to cut it down and not trying to explain everything, trying to be more specific and keeping it simple with numbers that are catchy. So I guess that is something that one of your examples maybe on like slide 2. around it shouldn't look like this, it should look like this, rather because providing too much information, too much detail isn't always necessary. So I think that's probably something I learned in a policy brief compared to an academic paper was being more concise and trying to remove the detail and just add the punchy, important things to get people's attention quicker. So that would be something that I learned during it based off your recommendations and other people's. So that's something I would say to other people. Maybe I would say one question to you before I then. There are some questions from other people, but a question from myself is considering you've worked at the World Bank and also in academia as well, how how does it differ writing policy briefs and or other types of articles working in a big institution like that compared to being an academic? Maybe that could be insightful for some people to know. And then after that, I can tell you what other questions people have.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think in academia, the distance is bigger, right? Because you are operating in this much kind of that freer academic space. It's all about knowledge. It's all about, filling gaps in the literature, and you can really get down some quite deep rabbit holes, so to speak, as an academic in terms of your area. And so that makes it, there's more of a distance that you have to traverse to get to zoom out, to come out of that and see that. Whereas the kind of research that the World Bank does is already kind of in the policy space, and it's motivated by a policy question in the way that academic research isn't necessarily. I mean, I think academic research could be more motivated by policy issues, uh, but often it's just motivated more by knowledge gaps, and so I think it is definitely harder. From an academic starting point, but I would encourage academics to think about the policy even before they start the research, even when they choose what they're going to research on, because then you're positioning yourself in a place that will make it easier to make those connections.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Vivian. So there are some comments in the chat which people have said. We have two people who've said this is incredible. Someone said they can face their first policy brief, and people have just said basically saying thank you. But there is a question. Uh, should policy briefs always be based on research articles? So I'll let you answer that question.
Okay. Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think in many ways, the best policy briefs are pulling from a broader literature, because it's quite hard to make that transition into the policy world based on like one very specific academic paper that might be quite narrow. And for policymakers, it might be more interesting not just to know what your paper on cook stove health impacts was, but actually to be able to say, there's now like 50 papers on cook stove health impacts, and they all agree that these don't work and these do. That's much more powerful from a policy perspective than, I researched these two stoves and this one was better than that one, right? So in some cases, so in a sense, particularly if you do review articles, I think those are particularly fertile to make the jump. However, if you as an individual are doing a very narrow paper, but it's important for your career or your contribution to the national debate in your country to take your very specific thing and turn it into something that's policy relevant, then by all means do it. And I definitely would encourage you. But I think that the broader the topic is, and the more it can agglomerate other people's research, the easier it is in a way to make that transition into the policy space.
Great. Thank you very much, Vivian. There aren't any more questions. So, guys, if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat. Use the Q&A or raise your hand. People have asked for the presentation and video. Yeah, so the recording will be on YouTube in the next few days, so you'll be able to get that, and then you'll be able to access the presentation after that. So yeah, don't worry, you'll get access to all of that. Um, I'll link you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly, Kate?
Yes, we can. Yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This is actually a very, very wonderful lecture this morning. It's just a pity that I came a bit late. That's why I'm requesting for the video. So please, kindly let us know the moment the video is on YouTube. Just I've missed some earlier part I want to go through. So please, I will actually employ
Sure.
you the moment it's been uploaded to the YouTube. Let us know. Is
Sure.
that
No
okay,
worries.
Kate?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that is my question.
The information
Yeah,
will be
that
there
is
for you. Don't worry.
Thank you very much. It's been a very, 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 very nice lecture today. And thanks to the
Sure.
presenter.
Thank you. Muchi, if you have a question, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Ken. Hi, Vivien.
Hey, hey, Richie.
Yeah, I have written a number of policy briefs, and I have been thinking about transforming them into academic papers. I missed your session on papers, so I don't know. Is there a possibility to transform them into academic papers?
So you're talking, Richie, about going in the opposite direction, right? So we've been talking about, I've got an academic article, I want to convert it to a policy brief, and you're saying, I've written lots of policy briefs, I want to convert them into academic articles. That's interesting, actually. In some ways, it might be more difficult because in the case of the academic article, it's like you've got more than you need, but you just need to prune it and sort of shape it. In the case of the policy brief, it might not be, sufficiently, rigorous or detailed for an academic purpose. So I guess it depends. I mean, I think there may be journals that are more interested in like policy type of analysis. In fact, I'm sure there would be, and it might be that you can adapt for those kinds of journals. But I think it would be quite a different exercise. And I'm just trying to think about like running the whole thing in reverse. And I'm not sure exactly about that, how that would be. Is it something that you've, explored or thought further about, or is this a new question that's coming up for you?
It's actually a very new question that's coming up for me.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think one could certainly write academic articles about policy and about policy experience, and sort of like case studies of, policy implementation. But typically, I think you'd need to add something additional to move it into the academic space. That would be my sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Muchi. Thanks, Vivien. I think there are a few more questions. So let me just. I think there are 4 hands up, so I think we could do those 4 questions and then we'll probably call it that because I think we'll have enough time for that. Zif, please go ahead first. Thank you.
Good day.
Hello, Joseph.
Good day.
So my question is a bit a brief one. There's always a bit of a challenge, which I find when I'm doing the energy studies sometimes, because the audience, it may not be really a policy kind of investigation, something to inform policy, but can guide the practice on how it is being done. So what normally is the best way to communicate? You are trying to communicate to only guide the policy vision want to see, or also try to test the practice before the policy?
Great, thanks. So I think that while we've been talking here a lot about policy briefs, I think it's more about audiences, right? Who is the right audience for your research? So maybe some types of research are very relevant for policy and maybe others are not. They might be more relevant for practitioners, as you say, I don't know, the engineers who are, running systems of a particular kind. So I think that some of the general principles apply, but you would need to understand your audience. So we've talked today about what makes policymakers tick. You would, if you're trying to reach practitioners, maybe operational engineers or accountants or whoever it is, you need to think about what makes them tick, and that might be quite different to what makes the policymakers tick. But the common idea is that understand your audience, know what's important to them, and then connect what you have with what they want. That exercise applies to any derivative product, whether you're writing for the press, whether you're writing for policymakers, whether you're converting your academic work into a sort of guidance note for practicing engineers or something of that nature. So I think it's still very relevant, and some of the principles are applicable, but you would need to understand your audience very thoroughly before embarking on that exercise.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks, Vivien. Okay, so there's one more hand up, and then I think there's just maybe have one question from the chat. So, David, please go ahead. David, can you hear us? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. If they don't, that's fine. We can always. Well, I'll leave David available to unmute just for a second in case he speaks. But yeah, there are a few more comments, people saying thank you in the chat and stuff. But there was one question. Somewhat, it's kind of a mixture of a comment and a question. Someone has said that they don't think that good communication and relationships exist between national policymakers and academic researchers in Africa. So that's more framed as a question, but I guess that's a comment. And maybe sort of they're asking, how do you pose that challenge, address that challenge, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And policy briefs don't take place in a vacuum. I think if there isn't a relationship and a dialogue that exists, then maybe policymakers might not be motivated to read policy briefs or to look for them. So you're absolutely right to point out that this is just one piece of a broader challenge, which is building that science policy interface, which is a country level challenge. And I think involves quite a lot of building relationships initially, I think. In our projects, in our CCG projects, we tend to try and bring policymakers and academics into the same classroom for training as a way of building the relationship. But within country, I think it might function initially maybe a bit more around personal networks. It might function around potentially being perhaps contracted by a ministry to do a particular piece of work. Or maybe in order to do that, the academics may need to raise their own profile, in fact, in order for policymakers to feel that they want to come and hire you to do things and so on. So I think that there are different ways it can happen. It's organic, it's difficult, it's likely to take time. But it is probably more likely to come. I think that academics need to take some initiative in a sense of maybe, going to policy gatherings and speaking, writing things, maybe not so much policy briefs, maybe initially more sort of media type of work, but sort of emerging out of the academia to be more of a sort of a voice, a kind of policy influencer or someone who's knowledgeable about things in the country, and gradually building up trust in the wider kind of country landscape. So that's not an easy thing. And it probably takes a few sort of, champions at the beginning, or people who just have that kind of visionary energy to do that. Once those doors are opened, I think maybe then it becomes easier for others to come in and also contribute. But it's a difficult and organic process. And you're absolutely right to say that we can't think about policy briefs in isolation from that wider environment of that relationship between academia and policy. Yeah. So I think there was also a comment in the chat about sample policy briefs. Yeah, maybe we can dig up a few from CCG Yeah.
I'll make sure
And
that they can be shared around.
yeah, maybe a variety of things from some some of the very shortest ones to some of the slightly more substantial ones. Yeah, be happy to do that.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Vivien. And thanks everyone else for joining. I hope you found it insightful.